I was standing in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee and smiling like an idiot, because I'd just spent the last 20 minutes making her favorite kind, extra cream, 2 sugars, just the way she liked it, and I was ready to say sorry for the stupid argument we had the night before, about something as dumb as forgetting to put the leftovers away, but I never made it into the room, because what I saw through that half-open door burned itself into my brain so deep, I can still smell the cheap cologne and the betrayal hanging in the air like smoke from a fire that had already destroyed everything. My wife, Rachel, the woman I'd loved for over 9 years, the mother of my daughter, was sitting on the edge of our bed with her head in her hands, and my brother, Derek, my own blood, was standing in front of her, shirtless, whispering something too quiet for me to hear but loud enough for my whole life to start unraveling. I didn't drop the coffee, I didn't shout, I didn't even walk in, I just stood there like a ghost watching his own funeral, and I think that moment, that quiet freeze frame of betrayal, was the exact second I stopped being the man they thought they knew. I turned around, walked back down the hallway like a stranger in my own house, and sat at the kitchen table while the hot mugs burned my palms, and I swear I didn't feel a thing. Maybe it's important to say this, before all this happened, I was the kind of guy who believed in second chances, who thought that family meant everything, who would have taken a bullet for my brother without asking why, who trusted my wife so much I never even thought to wonder why she started working late, or why her perfume started to smell like his cologne. But that morning flipped something inside me, like a switch I didn't know existed, and instead of blowing up or packing a bag, I just listened. I listened as he told her, "We can't keep doing this," and she said, "I know, but I can't stop," and I realized it wasn't a one-time mistake or some drunken accident like people try to pretend it is. It was a choice, one they'd made over and over again while I was out working 12-hour shifts and coming home with takeout and a smile, thinking I had a happy life. I wanted to burst in and scream, I wanted to tear the whole house apart, but something told me not to, not yet, not like that. Instead, I started watching, waiting, paying attention to the lies I used to overlook, and the more I paid attention, the more the truth came into focus, like sharpening an image I'd been staring at blindly for years. I saw the way she flinched when I touched her, how she avoided my eyes when I asked her how work was, how Derek always showed up with some excuse just when she said she had errands to run. They thought I didn't know, and maybe that was their biggest mistake, not the affair, not the betrayal, but thinking I was still the same man who would roll over and accept it. But I wasn't, not anymore. I started making a plan, not to hurt them, not in the way you're probably thinking, but to show them just how dangerous a quiet man can be when he finally stops pretending. And the first part of that plan started with my daughter, Ellie, who was only 6 but smart enough to notice the tension in the house, the way her mom avoided daddy's hugs and how Uncle Derek always seemed to smile a little too wide. I took Ellie out for ice cream one night, just the 2 of us, and I asked her how she felt at home lately, and she looked up at me with those big brown eyes and said, "Mommy cries a lot when you're not home," and I realized even my little girl had seen more than I had. So I asked her gently, "Do you like it when Uncle Derek comes over?" And she shrugged and said, "He always brings me candy but tells me not to tell you," and my stomach turned. That was the moment I knew, I couldn't just walk away, I had to make sure she was safe, and I had to make sure they never got the chance to ruin anyone else again. The next few weeks were a blur of preparation. I set up a few discreet cameras around the house, nothing illegal, just enough to confirm what I already knew and to protect myself when it all came crashing down. And it did, just like I knew it would. One Thursday night, I told Rachel I had a late shift, kissed her on the cheek, and watched her flinch again, like my touch was a poison she had to pretend didn't burn, and I left the house like normal, but I doubled back and parked down the street, sitting in my car with the engine off and my heart racing. I watched Derek pull into my driveway 20 minutes later, acting like he owned the place, and I watched him walk right through my front door with a key I didn't even know he had. 2 hours passed, and when I walked back into the house, I didn't yell, I didn't fight, I just handed her a manila envelope filled with screenshots, stills, and timestamps, and I watched the color drain from her face as she realized the mask had finally slipped. "Why didn't you say anything?" she whispered, like I was the one who'd broken her heart, and I laughed, an ugly, bitter sound that didn't even sound like me. "Because I wanted to see who you really were," I said, "and you didn't disappoint." Derek tried to say something too, some pathetic apology, but I didn't even look at him, because I already knew this wasn't about forgiveness anymore, it was about freedom. And that's when I told them, I wasn't going to fight for her, I wasn't going to scream or beg, but I was going to make sure they'd never forget what they did. That's when I started to become someone else, someone they couldn't predict or control, someone they should have thought twice before betraying. Because when a man loses everything he thought mattered, sometimes he finds the one part of himself he'd buried so deep, even he forgot it was there. And mine. Mine was ice-cold, calculating, and patient enough to let them destroy themselves, one carefully placed step at a time. But you'll see. That was just the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of Rachel crying behind the closed bedroom door, crying like she was the victim in this story, like she hadn't torn our life apart with her bare hands and let my brother help her do it. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way people expect, not in the explosive, violent way they write about in books or movies. No, what I felt was colder than anger, heavier than hate. It sat in my chest like a stone and refused to move. She came downstairs around 3 a.m. Her eyes swollen, wearing the same hoodie she used to steal from my side of the closet when she wanted to feel close to me, and for a second, I almost forgot everything, almost reached out, but then she opened her mouth and ruined it all over again. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, and I laughed again, quiet and hollow, because I was so tired of that sentence, so tired of hearing it from people who knew exactly what they were doing. "You meant it every time you said yes to him," I said, still not looking at her. "You meant it every time you lied to my face, every time you let him walk through the door like this was his home." She tried to cry harder, like volume would make her guilt more convincing, but I wasn't interested in her tears anymore. I was interested in truth, in clarity, in rebuilding something real, just not with her. "You don't love me anymore," she said quietly, and I shook my head slowly, not because I didn't love her, but because I didn't even know who she was anymore. "No," I said, "I just stopped loving the version of you I made up in my head." The next morning, she was gone, her things packed in a rush, a note on the table about needing space to think, but we both knew where she went, and I let her go, because I needed her to believe she still had control. That was the key to all of this, letting them think they were safe, that they'd won, that I'd quietly fade out of the picture like some wounded man licking his pride, but I wasn't disappearing. I was repositioning. The first thing I did was call a lawyer, a good one, the kind that charges by the hour and doesn't flinch when you say words like custody and adultery, and we started building the case, slowly, methodically. I didn't want revenge, I wanted custody of Ellie. I wanted to make sure she never had to be raised by two people who thought loyalty was optional and love was a game. My lawyer asked me if I had proof, and I slid the manila envelope across the desk, and I'll never forget the way she nodded, slow and sure, like she'd seen this story before, and it always ended the same way, for the ones who thought they could cheat without consequence. Meanwhile, Derek started showing up at my parents' house again, smiling like nothing had happened, laughing too loud at family dinners like he wasn't a walking nuclear bomb, and I watched our mother hang on his every word, blind to the damage he left behind. She always said he was charming, that he had a magnetic energy, but charm without character is just manipulation in a nicer suit. I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, I did something he didn't expect. I invited him to lunch, just me and him, like old times, and he showed up looking guilty but relieved, because in his mind, I was still the brother who forgave everything, who saw the best in him no matter what. We sat in the booth of a quiet diner just off Main Street, the kind with sticky menus and tired waitresses, and he talked like nothing had changed. "I know you're mad," he said, "but it wasn't just me, man, Rachel made her own choices too." And I nodded, sipping my coffee, watching his reflection in the window instead of his eyes. "You're right," I said calmly, "she did." He seemed surprised by how relaxed I was, how measured my tone had become, like he expected me to flip the table or throw a punch, but that wasn't who I was anymore. "I just hope you treat her better than I did," I added, and he blinked, probably wondering if this was an olive branch or a trap. The truth was, it was both. Because while he sat there patting himself on the back for stealing his brother's wife, I was already 3 steps ahead, talking to Rachel's employer about her schedule, gathering witness statements, building a picture of neglect and instability for the judge to see. I knew I couldn't erase the past, but I could shape the future, and the future I wanted was one where Ellie lived in a home filled with honesty, not secrets. 3 weeks later, I filed for full custody, and the look on Rachel's face when she got served was the first time I'd seen genuine fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for the idea that she might lose the one person who still loved her unconditionally. That broke her more than any affair ever could. She called me that night, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her, begging me to reconsider, saying she'd go to therapy, that we could fix things, for Ellie's sake, but it was too late. "You broke it," I said softly, "and now I have to fix it, for her." Derek showed up 2 days later, banging on my door like a man possessed, furious that I'd turned this into a legal war, and I stood there with the chain still on the door, watching him unravel on my front porch like a child caught stealing from the cookie jar. "You're sick, man," he shouted. "You're trying to destroy her." "No," I said calmly, "I'm trying to protect her," and I nodded toward the hallway, where Ellie's room sat quiet and safe. That's when I saw it, the flicker of guilt, the realization that in his need to win, he'd become everything our father warned us never to be. The case dragged on for weeks, filled with depositions and tense meetings and nights where I lay awake wondering if I was doing the right thing, wondering if my daughter would one day hate me for taking her away from her mother. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about punishment, it was about protecting what was left, about building something new out of the ashes they left behind. When the ruling finally came, the judge gave me primary custody, with Rachel getting visitation under supervision until she could prove stability, and I didn't feel victorious, I just felt relieved. She didn't even look at me when the verdict was read, she just held Ellie and cried, and I had to turn away because even now, after everything, it still hurt to see her broken like that. But sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes survival means letting go of the people who refuse to stop hurting you. And in the silence that followed, as Ellie took my hand and looked up at me with trust in her eyes, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. They thought they ruined me. But all they did was set me free. People assume that once the court hands you that paper, once the judge slams the gavel and rules in your favor, that everything suddenly gets easier. It doesn't. Winning custody was only the beginning, because raising a child after a betrayal like that isn't just about logistics or schedules or parenting books stacked on the nightstand, it's about rebuilding a sense of safety, about unlearning the way lies used to echo in your walls. For weeks, Ellie barely spoke at home, and when she did, it was mostly about things she remembered from before Mommy started visiting Uncle Derek more, before Daddy slept on the couch, before everything changed and no one told her why. She was 6. She didn't need the full story, but she needed stability, and I gave it to her in the small, quiet ways, school drop-offs with her favorite music playing low, bedtime stories even when I was too tired to keep my eyes open, pancakes on Saturday morning shaped like stars and hearts even when they came out more like weird blobs. I started to smile again, not because I forgot what they did, but because I was finally learning how to live without their shadow stretching over every corner of my life. But peace doesn't last forever, not when the people who burned you still think they can warm their hands at the ashes. It started with little things, Rachel showing up early for her visits, acting overly polite, overly composed, like she was trying on stability the way someone tries on a new outfit before returning it. Then there were the texts. "Can we talk? I'm working on myself. I miss the way things used to be." At first, I ignored them, told myself she was just confused, grasping at a past she'd already shattered, but then Derek messaged me too, out of nowhere, 2 weeks after the ruling, like he couldn't stand being left out of the chaos. He said we were brothers no matter what, said, blood runs deeper than mistakes. I didn't even reply. Because blood doesn't mean anything when you've already watched someone drain the life out of your home and still smile at your daughter like he deserves a place in her world. But it got worse. One night, after putting Ellie to bed, I got a knock at the door. It was Rachel, standing on the porch with her hair wet from rain and tears on her cheeks like she'd rehearsed the whole scene in front of a mirror. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered, and I didn't even ask what that meant, because I already knew. He'd done something, or said something, or finally revealed the version of himself I'd known for years but she'd refused to see. She stood there shivering, and for a second I hesitated, because there was a time when I would have wrapped her in a blanket and pulled her into my arms, but that man didn't live here anymore. "I can't help you," I said softly, "not like this." Her face crumpled, but I didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't let her in, because letting her in now wouldn't be kindness, it would be self-betrayal, and I'd already betrayed myself once by trusting her to protect what we built. Just tell me you don't hate me," she begged, and for the first time, I told her the truth. "I don't hate you," I said, "I don't feel anything at all." And that was worse for her than any insult could have been. She left without another word, and I stood there in the doorway for a long time, not because I was sad, but because I realized I didn't even care where she went after. That's when I knew I was finally healing. But healing doesn't mean you're safe from the past, it just means you've learned to stand when it comes back swinging. And it did come back. Derek showed up at Ellie's school one afternoon, said he just wanted to say hi, that he missed his niece, and I don't know what scared me more, the fact that he thought that was okay, or the fact that Ellie smiled at him because she didn't know any better. She didn't know what he'd done, who he really was. That night, I called my lawyer again, and we added a no-contact clause. The next time he showed up, the school called the police, and he was escorted off the property, still shouting that I was turning everyone against him, as if he hadn't done that all by himself. And Rachel. She started spiraling, missing visits, showing up late, calling me in the middle of the night with rambling apologies and stories that never made sense. I knew she was unraveling, and I knew that wasn't good for Ellie, but I still couldn't find it in myself to hate her, not fully, because I'd loved her once, and that kind of love doesn't vanish, it just dies slowly in quiet corners of the heart. One afternoon, I found Ellie sitting on the floor of her room, drawing pictures, and when I asked what she was making, she said, "This one's our house," and it was just me and her, no mommy, no Derek, just 2 stick figures and a dog we didn't even have. That hit me harder than anything. Not because she left Rachel out, but because she didn't even notice she was missing. She was adjusting. Adapting. Kids are resilient like that, but they also absorb everything. We think they don't understand, but they feel it, they carry the tension like little ghosts draped across their shoulders. So I sat with her, and we drew another picture, this time with Mommy in the corner, waving, smiling, and Ellie looked at it for a while before saying quietly, "I like this one better." And I nodded, because sometimes that's all you can do, just nod and keep building the version of life that feels safe. A few days later, Rachel called again, this time from a rehab center, said she'd checked herself in, said she was trying to get clean from everything, not just substances, but bad choices, toxic habits, selfish patterns. I told her I hoped she meant it. She said she did, and for the first time, her voice sounded steady, not desperate, not manipulative, just tired. Maybe she was really trying this time. I didn't know, and honestly, I couldn't focus on her anymore. I had a little girl to raise, a life to protect, and the only way to do that was to keep moving forward, even if the people behind me kept trying to pull me back. One night, after a long day, Ellie curled up beside me on the couch and said, "You're not sad anymore," and I smiled because she was right. I wasn't sad, not really. I was awake. I was rebuilding. And for the first time since it all fell apart, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Because I wasn't the man who lost his wife. I wasn't the brother who got betrayed. I was the father who stayed. And that was something no one could take from me again. The thing about peace is that it never announces itself. It doesn't come crashing through the door or blaze through the sky like a fireworks show, it arrives quietly, like the absence of a storm, like silence where there used to be shouting. And that's what life had become for me and Ellie, quiet, consistent, almost boring in the best possible way. She was thriving in school, drawing more, asking questions about planets and oceans and puppies. And I was learning how to laugh again without feeling guilty about it, how to breathe without checking over my shoulder to see what kind of emotional debris might be flying at me next. Then one day, out of nowhere, I got a letter. A real letter, not a text or an email, but something someone had taken the time to write with a pen, fold into an envelope, and mail. It was from Derek. I almost threw it away without reading it. But something stopped me. Curiosity, maybe, or the strange itch that comes when the past knocks on the door wearing new clothes. I opened it slowly, sitting on the back porch while Ellie played with her sidewalk chalk in the driveway. His handwriting hadn't changed, still rushed, still leaning too far to the right, like the words were trying to run off the page before he could finish them. He said he was sorry. Said he missed our family, not just Rachel, but me. Said he'd started therapy, that he was working on unpacking his damage, that he realized now how much pain he'd caused. He said he didn't expect forgiveness, but he hoped that one day I could look at him and not feel disgust. He ended it by writing, "You were always the better man, I just didn't know how to deal with that." I stared at those words for a long time. Not because I believed them, but because I realized he did. And that terrified me more than anything. Because if he genuinely thought I'd ever need to hear that, if he truly believed this was some competition he'd lost, rather than a family he helped destroy, then nothing had really changed. He still didn't get it. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about decency, about loyalty, about the kind of person you are when no one's watching. I never responded. I folded the letter back up and shoved it into the drawer with old receipts and broken chargers and pieces of a life I no longer needed. Some things don't deserve answers. But a week later, Rachel called again, and this time, her voice had weight to it, clarity, maybe for the first time in years. She said rehab had helped her see things she didn't want to see before, that her choices weren't just mistakes, they were symptoms of deeper wounds she never addressed. "I don't want to be your problem anymore," she said. And for the first time, I believed her. I told her I appreciated her saying that, and I meant it. Not because I was ready to open the door again, but because sometimes closure doesn't come from confrontation, it comes from finally hearing the truth out loud. She asked about Ellie. I told her she was doing well, growing fast, curious about everything. And Rachel cried quietly on the phone, not dramatically, not with the manipulation I'd heard before. Just, real tears, the kind that don't ask for anything in return. After that, she didn't call again for a long time. She still visited Ellie during her scheduled weekends, always supervised, always respectful of the rules. But she kept her distance otherwise. And that distance was the greatest gift she could have given us. Life started to fill in again. Not all at once, but slowly, new friends, small adventures, movie nights with too much popcorn, and quiet mornings where Ellie would crawl into my bed just to ask if the sun had risen yet. It was in those moments I started to feel like I hadn't just survived, I'd changed. Not into someone harder, but into someone clearer. Someone who didn't need revenge or pity, just truth. But the truth has a funny way of showing up in places you least expect it. One afternoon, I picked Ellie up from school, and her teacher pulled me aside. "Ellie's been talking about her uncle a lot lately," she said gently, "Derek." I froze for a second. I didn't know she remembered him so much, I admitted. The teacher nodded. She says he used to bring her ice cream, that he made her laugh. I felt something twist inside me. Because for all the damage he caused, he'd also played the role of fun uncle for a while. And children don't separate people into categories like adults do. To her, he was just someone who made her feel happy once. That night, I asked Ellie about it, gently, without judgment. She shrugged. "I just remember he used to tickle me and buy me cookies when Mommy was mad." Her eyes didn't carry pain, just curiosity. "What happened to Uncle Derek?" she asked, tilting her head. I hesitated. I wanted to protect her, but I also didn't want to lie. So I took a deep breath and said, "Sometimes people we love make choices that hurt others, and when they do, we have to choose what's safe for us." She was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Like when you chose pancakes instead of being sad." I smiled at her, because somehow, in her own innocent way, she got it. Exactly that. I chose pancakes. I chose early mornings and paint-stained hands and bedtime books with silly voices. I chose us. And even though the people who broke us might never fully understand what they destroyed, I did. I understood what it took to rebuild. What it meant to protect. What it meant to begin again. And I wasn't afraid anymore. Because I had already lost everything once. And in the ashes, I had found the only thing that really mattered. Myself. It's funny how the world keeps moving even when your heart gets torn to pieces. How traffic still hums down the street, kids still laugh on playgrounds, and grocery store clerks still ask if you found everything you needed. Even when your life has split in half and you're just trying to remember how to hold a coffee cup without shaking. I thought the worst was behind me. I thought I'd already walked through the fire and made it out with nothing left to burn. But grief, I've learned, isn't a single wave, it's a tide. It pulls you under just when you think you've made it to shore. It started with a phone call I wasn't expecting. Rachel had a car accident, nothing fatal, but bad enough to land her in the hospital. Her mom was the one who called me, voice trembling, trying not to panic. "She asked for you," she said softly, "not Derek. You." I stared at the wall for what felt like a lifetime. Why me? Why now? I hadn't spoken more than a handful of words to Rachel in months, just polite updates about Ellie or short acknowledgments when she sent birthday cards. We had boundaries, firm ones, and they'd kept us all safe. But I couldn't ignore it. As much as part of me wanted to keep the distance, the other part, the part that still remembered who she used to be, felt a flicker of something dangerously close to compassion. I drove to the hospital in silence, the kind of silence that hums in your chest like an old machine trying to restart. And when I saw her, bruised, bandaged, fragile in a way she'd never let me see before, I felt human. "Hey," she whispered, voice hoarse. "Hey," I said back, not knowing what else to offer. She looked at me like someone who had traveled too far from home and just found a light still left on in the window. "I thought I was gonna die," she said, "and the only face I wanted to see was yours. Isn't that messed up?" I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know what was worse, how honest that was, or how much I understood it. She reached for my hand, but stopped halfway, maybe remembering we weren't those people anymore. "I'm not asking for anything," she said quickly, I needed to say that. I needed you to know that whatever I did, whatever I became, I still remember the version of me that loved you, really loved you. And I still remember the version of you that deserved so much more than what I gave." Her voice cracked on the last word. And something inside me shifted, not forgiveness, not even sympathy. But closure. Not the kind that slams a door, but the kind that finally stops the wind from rattling the windows at night. "I know," I said. And I meant it. "I know." We sat like that for a while, not as lovers or enemies or co-parents. Just two people who had shared too much life to pretend we were strangers. When I left her room, the sky outside had started to drizzle, and the world looked softer somehow. But as I walked to the car, a shadow stepped out from behind the corner of the parking garage, Derek. Hands in his pockets, hair longer than I remembered, eyes bloodshot and restless. "I figured you'd show," he said quietly. I said nothing. He looked at me like he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words that would do anything but make it worse. So I spoke first. "She's gonna be okay." He nodded, "Good." Silence fell between us like fog, heavy and hard to see through. "I didn't come here to fight," he said after a while. "Good," I replied, "because there's nothing left to fight about." He flinched a little at that, like he wanted to argue. But deep down, he knew I was right. "You ever think about starting over?" he asked suddenly. "Every day," I said, "and I am. But that doesn't include you." That landed hard. He looked down, jaw clenched, but he didn't push. Maybe for the first time in his life, he accepted a boundary. And I appreciated that more than I hated him, which surprised me. When I got home that night, Ellie was already asleep. I sat at the edge of her bed, brushing her hair back gently. She stirred a little, smiled in her sleep, and mumbled something about a dragon made of pancakes. I laughed softly. This right here, was my life now. And I didn't need anything beyond it. But I'd be lying if I said it ended there. Because healing isn't clean, and life doesn't always stay in its lane. About a month later, Rachel called me again. This time, not because she needed help, but because she wanted to give me something. "I'm signing over full custody," she said. I froze. "What?" "I've been thinking a lot," she continued, "about what kind of mother Ellie needs, Anne. I'm not that person, not consistently, not the way you are." She paused, and I could hear her trying not to cry. "She needs stability, and you are that, even when you're exhausted or scared or broken. You show up, and I don't. I haven't, not enough." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not because I thought she was wrong, but because it takes a kind of strength to admit you're not what someone needs. And for the first time in years, I saw Rachel not as my ex, not as my pain, but as a woman trying to make peace with herself. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it from the bottom of my soul. Not just for Ellie, but for me. Because that one decision closed a chapter one never thought would end. And just like that, the world shifted again. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, solid way that told me I was finally on steady ground. I took Ellie to the courthouse with me the day the papers were finalized. She wore her favorite sparkly shoes and held my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. And when the judge looked at me and said, "Congratulations, you now have full legal custody," I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. Deep and full and steady. Like I hadn't in years. Outside the courthouse, Ellie looked up at me and asked, "Does this mean you're my forever?" And I laughed, heart full and throat tight. "I've always been your forever," I said. "I just finally have the paper to prove it." I thought that signing those papers would be the end of it. The moment when the past would finally stop knocking on my door. But pain doesn't ask for permission, and neither does memory. They crawl in through the cracks, show up when the house is quiet, when the lights are low and your guard is down. For a while, things felt stable. Ellie and I found a rhythm. Mornings were filled with cereal and mismatched socks. Evenings with homework and, just one more story, please. And somewhere in the in-between, I felt myself becoming whole again. But healing isn't a straight line. It loops, it dips, it backtracks. And just when you think you've moved on, someone shows up to remind you where the scar came from. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was cleaning out the garage, dust in the air, the radio low, Ellie riding her bike in the driveway. I heard a car pull up, the kind of engine I hadn't heard in years but still recognized like muscle memory. It was Derek, again. I stepped outside, squinting in the sun. He looked thinner, older, more tired than the last time. He didn't get out of the car right away, just sat there like he was negotiating with himself. Finally, the door opened, and he walked up slowly, hands in his pockets like a kid caught stealing cookies. "Hey," he said, like we were casual acquaintances, like we hadn't been through hell and back. "What do you want, Derek?" I asked, not harshly, just directly. Because I didn't have the energy to pretend anymore. He looked over at Ellie, then back at me. "She's getting so big," he said, voice soft, "she looks like you." "She is mine," I said. The words were sharper than I meant, but I didn't take them back. He nodded slowly, like he deserved that. "I didn't come here to start anything," he said, "I came to tell you I'm leaving town." That made me pause. "Leaving?" "Yeah," he said, "I got offered a job out in Arizona, managing a construction crew, decent pay, fresh start." I figured, maybe it's time I stopped orbiting the mess I made. For a second, I didn't know what to say. Because part of me wanted to be angry all over again. And part of me, God help me, just felt tired. "I hope you take the job," I said finally, "and I hope you mean it this time. Because every time you show up, it feels like you're trying to drag me back to a place I worked hard to escape." He nodded, eyes cast downward. "I get that. I do." Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. "What's that?" I asked. "Something I should have given you a long time ago," he said, holding it out. I hesitated, then took it. Inside was a photograph, me, Rachel, and Ellie, taken years ago on Ellie's second birthday. We were all smiling, holding a cake with too many candles and too much frosting. And scribbled on the back were 4 words in Rachel's handwriting: "We were happy once." I didn't know what to feel. Grief. Bitterness. Nostalgia. It all hit at once, like a wave that forgot to pull back. "I found it when I moved out of Rachel's place," Derek said, "figured it belonged to you more than me." I nodded slowly. And for a brief second, I remembered that once, long ago, we were just 2 brothers who built forts and shared bunk beds and argued over who got the last slice of pizza. Before all the lies, before the betrayal, before love turned into a battlefield. "Goodbye, Derek," I said. He looked like he wanted to say something more, but didn't. He just nodded and walked away. And this time, I didn't watch him drive off. Because for once, I believed it might actually be the last time. That night, I tucked Ellie in and sat on the porch with that old photo in my hands. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I wanted to remember, but because I needed to release it. And as I lit a small fire in the backyard pit and watched the picture curl into ash, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. But life, as always, had another twist waiting. A week later, Rachel's mom called me again. Only this time, her voice was shaky, urgent. "Rachel's in trouble," she said. My heart dropped. "She's okay," she added quickly, but she checked herself into a rehab center. I sat down, the wind knocked out of me. I didn't know it had gotten that bad. "Neither did we," she said quietly, "she hit it well. But after the accident, she spiraled. Pain meds turned into more meds, and then into something else." I felt sick, not because I still loved her, not in the way people think of love, but because she was Ellie's mother. And no matter what had happened between us, her pain mattered. "I'll do what I can," I said, "for Ellie's sake." Rachel stayed in rehab for 6 weeks. She called once, just once, toward the end, her voice trembling, small. "I don't deserve forgiveness," she said, "but I'm trying to become someone I don't hate when I look in the mirror." I didn't say much, just listened. Because sometimes listening is the only thing a person needs to start again. After she got out, she didn't try to see Ellie right away. She respected the boundaries we'd agreed on. And for that, I respected her in return. Weeks passed, then months. I started dating again, slowly, cautiously. A woman named Claire from Ellie's school, her son was in the same art class. She was kind, patient, and didn't ask for pieces of me I wasn't ready to give. She understood that love after betrayal is like walking barefoot after a storm, you test every step. One evening, I invited her and her son over for dinner. Ellie laughed more that night than I'd seen in weeks. And I realized, maybe we were finally building something new, not out of revenge, not out of grief, but out of quiet hope. After they left, Ellie came up to me and said, "Dad, I like her. She makes you smile." And I couldn't help it, I laughed. Because my daughter had always been my mirror. And if she saw the change in me, maybe it was real. But the biggest surprise came 3 months later. I got a letter in the mail, no return address, just my name written in careful, shaky script. Inside was a short note from Rachel. "I've enrolled in nursing classes. I don't know what the future holds. But I'm finally walking toward it, not away from it. Thank you for being stronger than me when I couldn't be. Tell Ellie, when she's ready, I'll be here." And that was the moment I knew. We were all broken in our own ways. But broken doesn't mean finished. And sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's rebuilding something better than what they tried to take from you. There are moments in life when you realize the storm has passed. Not because everything is suddenly perfect, but because you've stopped bracing for lightning. That was me. Standing on the sidelines of Ellie's school play. Watching her march across the stage in a homemade costume, cheeks flushed, smile wide. Claire sitting beside me, her hand gently resting over mine. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next disaster. The air felt calm. Not empty, just calm. Like I could finally breathe without feeling the weight of betrayal on my chest. When the show ended and Ellie ran into my arms, something clicked inside me. Not a dramatic realization, not a movie moment, just a quiet certainty. I survived. We survived. Later that night, while Ellie was asleep and the dishes were drying in the rack, Claire turned to me and asked a question I hadn't been ready for until now. "Do you ever think about going back to your old house?" I looked at her, surprised. "Why would I?" She shrugged softly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Sometimes going back shows you how far you've come." I thought about it. About the house where everything unraveled. The hallway where I found Rachel's texts, the bedroom that echoed with silence after she left. The backyard where Ellie once learned to ride a bike before the world fell apart. So the next day, I drove there. Just me, no Ellie, no Claire, I needed to face it alone. The house had been sold, repainted, the mailbox replaced. But I parked across the street and just watched for a while. People passed by, unaware of the memories that still lived behind those walls. And I realized something strange, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness, either. What I felt was gratitude. Because that house had seen the death of one version of me. But without it, the version of me I had become, the father, the survivor, the man rebuilding a life, wouldn't exist. I never went inside. Didn't need to. I had already left that place behind long ago, even if my heart had taken its time catching up. That night, I wrote Rachel a letter. Not out of obligation, not out of lingering emotion. But because I knew it was time to close the chapter fully, with dignity, not bitterness. Rachel. I'm proud of the work you're doing. I'm proud that you didn't stay down. Ellie's growing, changing, becoming someone amazing, and I see parts of you in her, the bright curiosity, the way she talks with her hands when she's excited. I won't lie and say everything's forgiven. But I will say this, I no longer carry the weight of what happened between us. I carry the future instead. And you should, too. One day, when Ellie's ready, I hope the two of you can rebuild something, not for the past, but for what's left ahead. I mailed it without rereading it. Because some words are meant to fly without the anchor of second guesses. A few weeks later, Ellie asked me something I'd known was coming. "Dad, why don't I see Mom anymore?" I took a deep breath and sat down beside her. She was 9 now, old enough for pieces of the truth, if not the full weight of it. Your mom had a hard time for a while, I said gently. She made some mistakes, some big ones, but she's trying to be better now. Ellie looked up at me, those same hazel eyes I once fell in love with in Rachel. Does she love me? She does, I said, very much. There was a long pause before Ellie asked. Can I write her a letter? I nodded, trying to keep the tears from showing. Of course, sweetheart. That weekend, she wrote her first letter, full of simple words, innocent questions, drawings of hearts and suns. And when Rachel replied, I could see the effort in every line. She didn't talk about herself much, just told Ellie how proud she was of her science project, how beautiful her handwriting had gotten, how much she missed her laugh. The letters became a quiet bridge between them. No visits yet, we agreed to take it slow, but it was a start. And you know what? That's all life is, really. A collection of starts and restarts and the bravery to keep choosing hope over fear. Claire and I grew closer. She never rushed me, never pressured me to be more than I was ready to be. She just showed up, for me, for Ellie, for the quiet moments when the past tried to whisper lies. And one night, after Ellie had gone to bed, we sat on the couch with a glass of wine and she said, You know what I admire most about you? I smiled, that I make a mean grilled cheese. She laughed, then shook her head. No. That you didn't let what happened turn you into someone bitter. You could have. But you didn't. That hit me in a place I didn't know was still raw. Because the truth is, I almost had let it ruin me. There were days I wanted to scream, to tear everything apart. But instead, I built. Brick by brick, day by day. Until I had something worth protecting again. By spring, I had sold my old business and started a new company, something small, something mine. I named it Second Rise. Because I liked the sound of it. Because that's what we were doing, rising again, after everything. And then, one warm April afternoon, something happened that would have knocked me flat a year ago but now only made me pause. Derek wrote to me. It wasn't long, just a simple note sent through Claire's work address, since he knew not to overstep. I'm staying sober. Arizona's been good to me. I'm in therapy. I'm learning that being a brother isn't about blood, it's about showing up, especially when it's uncomfortable. I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know. You were right. About everything. I'll carry that truth with me. Always. I folded the letter and put it in a box, the same one with Ellie's baby pictures, old birthday cards, and now, her letters to Rachel. Because that's where it belonged, not in the trash, not in my heart, but in the archives of what had been survived. The final twist of this story. It's not dramatic. It's not some big reveal or fiery confrontation. It's this. I'm okay. I'm really, truly okay. I walk into each day without armor. I laugh without looking over my shoulder. I tuck my daughter in at night and believe in tomorrow. And when I catch my reflection in the mirror, I no longer see the man who was betrayed. I see the men who refuse to stay broken. So if you're listening to this, if you've ever had someone tear your life apart, if you've ever cried on the bathroom floor wondering how to start over, let this be your proof. You can rise again. Even after the worst kind of hurt. Even after the ones who should have protected you turn into the ones who wound you most. You are not what they did to you. You are what you choose to become in the wreckage. And me. I chose to rebuild. Not for revenge. But for freedom. And it turns out, that was the most powerful move I ever made.